I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun, sitting in for Kemini Amanor. Now, established in January 8, 1912, it's been 111 years since the African National Congress has been in existence. Starting as the South African Native National Congress, the name changed to the African National Congress in 1923. The party was set up as a social democratic political party growing from a liberation movement. Known for its opposition to apartheid, it has governed South Africa since 1994, when Nelson Mandela became the first black president of the country. The ANC has lived through a few phases as its history is deeply intertwined with South Africa's fight to end apartheid. While the ANC has moved with the country into the post-apartheid era, it continues to identify itself as a liberation movement, even though it is a registered political party. The party has managed to retain a comfortable electoral majority at the national level and in most provinces, and has provided each of South Africa's 4 presidents since 1994. But as the years have passed, the ANC has found itself mired in controversy, politically and otherwise, particularly relating to widespread allegations of political corruption among its members, but also around the handling of South Africa's affairs, particularly the economy. Now, joining me from various parts of South Africa, particularly Johannesburg, to have this conversation is Lwazi Somya. He is a senior researcher and Southern African liaison officer. Also joining me from Johannesburg is Mandla Matshika, political analyst, and rounding things out is Omry Makgoale. He is a political analyst from Alberton, South Africa. Gentlemen, welcome to Village Square Africa, and it's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Let's start the conversation in terms of sort of where the African National Congress is coming from. And this was a political party born from the struggle to end apartheid in South Africa. Now, the party bore the hopes of millions of South Africans of a better country and a better future. Now, with 111 years behind it, the question is, has that hope borne fruit, or are South Africans still hoping? I'll use this as your opening statement. So, gentlemen, let's do this in about a minute and a half each to have an opening and a foundation for this conversation. Lwazi, let me come to you first. What do you think? Are South Africans still hoping, or has the ANC delivered on the hope that was established 111 years ago?
To South Africa, in particular relating to the creation of free education for the poor, especially at primary school level, the creation of social health care where people can go in and not have to pay, the creation of social grants within South Africa, the creation of new labor laws, and various other social mechanisms that can ensure the protection of the most indigent within South Africa. However, that has been undercut by spate of corruption that as we have seen in the State Capture Commission with the Zondo Commission, where a lot of corruption happened over the last 11 to 15 years under the ANC's governance. However, what we have seen more recently is the re-establishment of crime investigation institutions, the arrest of persons alleged to be accused in the State Capture Commission, along with the prosecution of those who are alleged to have stolen crimes within South Africa. So there is glimmers of hope in terms of dealing with the issues of corruption and crime. However, there are large institutional barriers, and this is why the ANC still calls itself a liberation movement, because it regards itself as wanting to liberate the people of South Africa beyond this, beyond the apartheid laws, but also beyond the socio-economic and structural apartheid legacies that still exist within South Africa, in particular related to the black population. So in general, the ANC itself has had a mixed bag of results over the last 28 years in government. However, its legacy and history of fighting against colonialism and apartheid will never be forgotten in the social consciousness of South Africans.
All right, Omry, you've heard what Lwazi has said, and in terms of still being a liberation movement, some 28 years after it actually came into leadership in South Africa, is this still a party that continues to tell South Africans to hope for a better future, or has in one way or the other been able to provide that in the past 28 years?
That the ANC is a living organism. You know, from 1912 up to 1994, when President Mandela took over, it was a different type of struggle, and it passed through different phases of its development. And from 1994 up to now, maybe the stages, the steps have not been well done, and it has not moved well from 94 up to now. But it just, it as a living organism, it needs to, adapt to the new conditions, the new external and internal conditions inside the ANC, so that it can continue to be there in the next 100 years. I believe that it will be there in the next 100 years, but the key issue is it must continue to adapt to changing conditions externally and internally to itself. Thank you.
All right. Mandla, let me come to you now. So you've heard adapt, you've heard, of course, still being a liberation movement, but is this 111 years later something for growing hope or hope that has been met? What do you think?
It's important to add that the ANC is run under a system of a democratic phase. So I think one may actually add that it has failed dismally in the quest to be a liberation movement as such. I mean, we can see the amount of political instability in and around the ANC. We have seen the lack of service delivery. We have seen the increase in our social economic issues. We have seen the lack of confidence to aspire foreign direct investment. We have seen corruption rise, unemployment skyrocketing. But above all, they have tried in many ways in the quest to curb corruption, as you see with the investigative units and so forth. But one may add in large that they have failed the citizens at large.
Okay. So it's not so unusual to see one political party being dominant. And with South Africa, it's a dominant political system that we see with the ANC, of course, providing presidents since 1994. But the ANC continues to face leadership challenges. President Cyril Ramaphosa just survived an impeachment attempt after the Farmgate scandal. He served as deputy president to Jacob Zuma, who has been heavily indicted in the Zondo Commission report into state capture. We also saw Thabo Mbeki's presidency caught up in the arms deal scandal, and his deputy president was Jacob Zuma. So many people are asking about the credibility of the ANC as it moves into the next stage. So, Omry, let me come to you because you talked about the ANC being able to adapt to the changes and to the future and things like that. But how credible does the ANC remain with so many corruption issues linked to the party's president, who do in turn become South Africa's presidents? Does the party still have a moral leg to stand on in terms of leadership for South Africa?
Yes, at the moment, we have crisis inside the ANC in terms of corruption, and that the ANC has been captured in the past 15 years plus. It has been captured through the parliamentary and internal electoral laws. I think I need to clarify this and emphasize this. The ANC has been captured because of the current parliamentary electoral laws and the ANC internal electoral laws. So we believe that once we reform these electoral laws, both parliamentary and internally, ANC internal electoral laws, the ANC will recover from where it is. But at the moment, it is true, it's a corrupt organization led by corrupt leaders, and so we need to clean it. It's something that we accept, that we need to clean the ANC. And for it to be cleaned, as I say, we need to reform the parliamentary laws and the ANC internal electoral laws. It will recover. It will recover. At the moment, it is true. It is, at the bottom of its, of itself. It's a very low ebb. I fully agree with that. But I think that it will be recovered as soon as we change the parliamentary laws and the electoral laws.
Okay, so I want to piggyback on that to ask Lwazi a question. And Omry talks about the ANC being captured, just as captured as the state is. And that's, of course, in reference to the Zondo Commission, state capture, state-owned enterprises that have had many issues and scandals attached to them in South Africa. But we've seen that the party's internal issues go beyond leadership at the top. The party has serious internal challenges as well. But one thing that's important to note is that political parties hold sway over whether the democracy that they are supposed to protect delivers the will of the people or if it doesn't. So how political parties are organized tends to play a very big role in the health or ill health of democratic states like South Africa. So what do the internal issues of the ANC say about the party's leadership and its ability to deliver on the will of South Africans for a better life in general for themselves and the people around them? Lwazi.
So there are two levels of this. The first one is at national level, where you see disunity amongst the ANC leaders, and that is translated in up until branch level at local government level, where there are systems and places where political parties are supposed to be working together to achieve and pass goals and commit to services, but internal party squabbles sway the way going forward, and services are not delivered to the people. And that's part and parcel of what has happened in terms of municipal paralysis, when the factional issues of the ANC interfere with governmental issues, running of day-to-day of government. However, there is also another aspect to it. South Africa's constitution has crafted a methodology to which parties can share power, and it has, in most recent years, it has resulted in the notion of coalition governments. Now, the coalition governments within South Africa have been highly unstable, to preventing services to be delivered to the people. Now, this is broader and more beyond the ANC, as the institutional architecture of this country and its constitution are premised on the issue of power sharing between minority parties and power sharing amongst parties in order to ensure that there is some form of unity and synergy going forward. However, we have not reached that democratic maturity to which coalition governments has worked going forward, including setting up frameworks and how different parties are supposed to work within a governmental framework. And secondly, how do we now ensure that services are actually delivered whilst we sort out the nuances and the institutional problems that parties face? Another issue is that President Ramaphosa, within his first term of the ANC, had a huge hill to climb, in particular relating to the opposition that he had met within his top six at the time, his national executive with the suspended Secretary General Makgoale, and also issues between the factionalism within his own organization that has paralyzed his decision making, and him taking more cautious steps in order to deal with the corruption within his own organization. Now, that paralysis has often prolonged the service delivery within the South African context, but also it has also doused the credibility of the leadership of the ANC. Now, President Ramaphosa has gone in a second term as mandated by the 55th National Conference in December. He has now the opportunity to transcend with the barriers that once confronted him in his first tenure as president of the ANC, and actually take decisive action. As we have seen in the January 8th statement, the ANC is committed to taking more proactive action. South Africans are waiting in bated breath to see a plan of action that will stem from the State of the Nation address, which will be in early next month. But also, South Africans are also waiting to see whether or not this reform and renewal agenda that is being punted by the president will carry any fruit in relation to the day-to-day lived experiences.
So before I move on, how much hope do you have in that? Because as you talk about the president's second tenure, the ANC structure around him hasn't changed. The challenges that South Africa faces have not changed. How do we expect him to sort of move beyond that and do differently than what he's been doing and what other South African presidents of the ANC party have been doing before him?
So one thing that has happened that is very interesting in the previous national conference of the ANC is that there's a new enunciation of new leadership that has come up the ranks, and there's a more youthful national executive committee. Secondly, the mass opposition that he had within the national executive committee has weaned its way out. So you don't have opposition from your secretary general if you want to carry out something. You don't have opposition from a deputy secretary general. He has managed to coalesce a team around him that is more or less aligned to his vision of the objectives of the ANC. So those are sprouts of hope. However, what we have seen in the past, even when those sprouts of hope have been there, lack of execution of policies has remained a major stumbling block towards the ANC achieving the aspirations that set out within its own constitution, along with the Freedom Charter and the manifesto that it distributes at every single electoral cycle. 2024 will prove to be a very critical year for the ANC. As the polls have shown, the ANC stands a good chance of going below 50%, and finding coalition partners going forward in governing South Africa, or even staying in power, will be very critical going forward to the president's calculation. However, there is an opportunity for him to claw back votes, as he currently ranks above the organizational brand in terms of being the ANC president, of going above 50% and ensuring that the ANC still holds on to power going forward. However, these will come with how he delivers over the next 2 years, and whether or not the South African people believe that the ANC is its future or not.
And that's a point we'll get to before we wrap things up. So one final question before we go for the break. We see South Africa continuing to have a number of issues that it needs to address. It is ranked as the world's most unequal society, with the World Bank saying that about 10% of the population own over 80% of the country's wealth. Racial disparities and inequalities still exist. The recent story of the young black man who was assaulted at a pool readily comes to mind. Xenophobia continues to be an issue for the country. Eskom's issues and load shedding have gotten progressively worse in the past several years. Unemployment hit the highest levels last year, coming just back a little bit in the final quarter of 2022. So, Mandla, I'm taking this question straight to you. Do you think the ANC has made progress on these issues? It's been the same party leading South Africa for the past 28 years, unbroken leadership, or is it a party that's still trying to possibly take refuge behind the legacy of 84 years of white rule and then its subsequent liberation history? What do you think?
Later, and we are still plagued with, as I said at the beginning, we are still plagued with our socio-economic issues, which are increasing by the years, by the numbers. We still face one of the largest issues of unemployment, inequality, and the lack of inclusivity. And it just becomes a problem when everything becomes more about political representation as opposed to political participation. We need young people in these key strategic positions to also have a say in major key decision making. In that way, we will maybe find strategies and policies in place to alleviate unemployment, to alleviate our socio-economic issues, service delivery, access to basic health and education. So one can confidently say that the ANC is a shadow of its former self, and it has not delivered 28 years later in any of its promises to the citizens.
All right, and some might say that it's still liberating 28 years later. Gentlemen, we're going to go on a break and we'll resume this conversation. So while the African National Congress may have its challenges, it has given South Africa 4 presidents and could give a 5th or maybe a 4th who continues in the next general elections. But with the issues that the party is battling internally and the issues the country is facing, the occasion of its 111th anniversary is the time to ask what the future holds for the African National Congress and South Africa. We'll get to that after the break.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
This is Village Square Africa. My guests are Mandla Matshika, political analyst, Lwazi Somya, he's a senior researcher and Southern African liaison officer, and Omry, Makgoale, political analyst. Now, while the African National Congress has been in existence for 111 years, it has been South Africa's governing party for the past 28 years. Let's turn our attention to what this means for the future of Africa's oldest political party. So looking at the data, since 2014, the ANC's electoral majority has continued to decline. In 2021's municipal elections, the party's share of the national vote dropped below 50% for the first time ever. South Africa has more than 20 political parties, even closer to 50, if not more. Or I beg your pardon, 30. Now, is the clock slowly but surely winding down on the ANC as South Africa's favored party? Omry, let me come to you with that. And Lwazi, I also want you to take on that question. Is the time starting to wind up for how much longer the ANC can hold public and popular favor?
I think the problem at the moment is corruption inside the ANC and poor performance in government, municipalities, the sewage is flowing in the streets, and the railway infrastructure being damaged, and the trains not functioning, the harbors not functioning well. But basically, it's poor service and incompetence and corruption inside the ANC that has led to the decline in the vote for ANC. So we believe that if we can, as we say, if we can change the parliamentary laws, we'll be in a position to clean the ANC, in my mind. Because the ANC at the moment is corrupted because of the electoral laws. It's because of the electoral laws that the ANC is corrupt like this, the parliamentary electoral laws and the ANC internal electoral laws. So as such, we don't have the best citizens or best people in parliament because of the corruption inside the ANC, because of the electoral laws. So what we need, when we change the parliamentary electoral laws, we will then have the best citizen in parliament to go and become members of parliament. We believe they will clean the country, and in the process, they will also clean the ANC. That's what I think.
Okay, Lwazi, I want to pick up from that because Omry has used the words captured. He's now saying that it's about the electoral laws, both parliamentary and those in the ANC, that seem to have held the ANC back from being able to do what it needs to do for South Africa. But when you look at the numbers, which simply do not lie, it also shows a dissatisfaction that South Africans have. It doesn't necessarily mean they're flocking then to other political parties. They're just being dissatisfied with the ANC and possibly politics overall because it's not delivering for them, particularly democracy. In terms of these dwindling numbers, do you think the clock is winding down for the African National Congress?
With due respect, I'd like to disagree with Omry. The issue is just not electoral laws. They are fundamental, structural, societal problems that exist within both South Africa's socio-economic and political and economic context that need to be reformed. And the mere electoral law, changing how people are elected, does not garner one sufficient voting base in order for you to be carried out and you representing a particular status quo and democracy itself, as we've seen in the USA, has not guaranteed the best amongst us eventually emerge. So what really is at crisis here is twofold. Number one, the ANC is at a tipping point at the moment on the basis of its past failures in service delivery and corruption and the rise in unemployment, the rise in cost of living, the inability to satisfy the labor movement, at the same time being perceived as too restrictive towards the business class of the country. So the ANC itself, in terms of macroeconomic policy, has shortchanged itself trying to walk a tightrope in terms of macroeconomic policy and how they're going to how they're going to address the economy, and that has resulted in policy confusion amongst investors, and that has resulted in a lowering of investment. As we have seen in the past, also service delivery protests where young people themselves have pulled themselves away from the formal political process and have started mobilizing outside of the formal political space, as we have seen in over 2,000 service delivery protests in the past year alone. So all these are a cannon fodder and gunpowder towards a keg that we define as South Africa, as we've seen early ruptures in the July unrest, where a lot of people in the provinces of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng ransacked malls and basically people were taking because they didn't have. So the ANC has to address the issues, not only about Eskom and corruption, but also we as a country need to also be proactive in terms of how we deal with political actors and be informed citizens that take political action into our own hands. In the past, the ANC has initiated policy on the basis of public unrest, the HIV, ARV policies that are happening within South Africa. Those are products of the ANC, even though the public had to push them to that. The free schooling at basic education level, even though there are infrastructure backlogs, those are ANC policies that the public has gone on around. So just seeing that it being just an electoral problem itself scapegoats and negates the many multifaceted layers to which society within South Africa has not demobilized post-1994, and the structural inequalities and legacies of post-apartheid South Africa still manifest in how the day-to-day relations amongst us as a society and also how the political actors are at play. So this 111-year anniversary of the ANC is very critical for the ANC. However, the country itself also acknowledges that they're also willing to move beyond the ANC itself, yes, as we have seen with the coalition governments and at local government level. The country also acknowledges that even though they might, in the short term, experience bumps in transitioning of governments, they also are willing to make their voices heard via the ballot paper. Also, what is also interesting to see in the previous election is that instead of the ANC, other parties growing in terms of absolute numbers, the ANC simply lost people and people simply did not turn out to vote. Mm-hmm. So the entire political process, the entire political system, the people are feeling more and more disillusioned about, including that of opposition parties, which are not managing to garner sufficient people to vote for them, and them having upward mobility in terms of the ballot box. So all these multifaceted layers are currently impacting the political process and the political reality of South Africa at the moment. So just reducing it to electoral outcomes itself is not sufficient analysis that will appropriately explain the multiplicity of the actions and things to be considered by the ANC going forward, along with South Africans on a day-to-day basis.
And so 2 points you make there that I'm going to use for my next question, which is going to Mandla, and that's about going forward. But you also talk about young voters, and that's something we've seen across the continent, this sort of dissatisfaction and separating themselves from the political process because they simply feel that that process has not delivered. So, Mandla, we've seen many South Africans who perceive the party, that is the ANC, as being entrenched in corruption and entitlement. And there are opinion polls running in South Africa because of this. Now, the party's share of the popular vote in 2019 and the municipal elections in 2020 reflect a rising dissatisfaction with the ANC. The next generation of voters who will set the country's political agenda were born well after the ANC's rule began. They don't have that same sort of connection to the ANC as a liberation movement as their parents and their grandparents. So the question now is, does the party still have anything to offer South Africans, and particularly a new generation, which has a changing demographic and a voter profile that is not like probably what the ANC itself is used to? What do you think?
I think for the ANC to provide any form of hope going forward is to have a whole overhaul of the National Executive Committee. It is to also have a total overhaul of the various policies that are put in place. And most importantly, we need young people, as I alluded earlier on before, in key strategic positions, which is one of the few ways in which the ANC can have a functioning and stable way of governance. We look at major examples. For instance, we look at the fourth industrial revolution. The ANC is nowhere near adapting to the skills required to adapt to the fourth industrial revolution. This is simply because we don't have young people, as I alluded, in these key strategic positions. Why do we have Minister of Energy and Resources, and yet he's not even qualified to govern at that department, at that level? Why are they unemployed engineers sitting there at home as we could have them in place of those positions? The major key factor arising from the ANC is that there is not much political participation, only political representation, and therefore we cannot have outdated leaders leading the younger generation going forward. So my answer to that question is that the only way that could be answered is to have young people involved in these key strategic positions going forward. And that will ignite a bit of change and a bit of confidence within the ANC going forward.
So Omry, I'll round that question back to you. Is this about the ANC? Is it really ready to look more like what South Africa's demographic looks like, which is representative of much of Africa with a very large youth population, unfortunately, not always highly skilled and not always employed? Does the ANC itself recognize that there is a changing demographic, a changing voter profile, and it must find a way to plug into the hopes and the wishes and the dreams of a new generation of South Africans?
I think I need to first comment on the impact of electoral laws. I noticed that my colleagues here don't appreciate the impact of electoral laws on what is happening in the country. You know, when you have a poor electoral law, instead of electing 100 ethical leaders, you elect 100 thieves. And the whole thing changes the whole thing. You know, the state changes. If you have 100 thieves in a department, it's different from when you have one and 99 people are ethical. And that's where the impact of the electoral law comes in. So unless you understand that, if you don't have a good electoral law, you are most likely to be bribes, vote rigging, all these things on a high scale, and you end up with crooks much more than with ethical leaders. Once you don't understand that, then you can't understand this problem. The same with the issue of the youth, the same with the youth of the skills. If you have ethical leaders in office, they are more likely to learn to do the right thing. But if you have a crook in the office, they are not interested in doing the right thing. They are interested more in stealing, in looting, instead of doing the right thing. So even if you have the best of youth next to you with all the skills, those skills won't be utilized because the crook is in charge. You know, and this is where the electoral law comes in. And I think that my colleagues don't appreciate the impact of that electoral law. And I wish to say that if we change these electoral laws, if we change them, we are more likely to have ethical leaders in parliament, ethical leaders in municipalities more than now. You know, and at the moment, the state is captured. We've got many crooks in charge of many offices, and everything is paralyzed. The railways are not running well, ESCOM is not running well. It's all because of leadership. It's all because of leadership. And once you have good leaders in office, then things will run better. But if you don't have good leaders in office, you can have whatever you have. If you don't have good leaders, everything falls apart. And that's where the impact of the electoral law is. And I think that my colleagues don't appreciate that. Maybe they don't see the importance of that. But thank you very much for that.
Okay, I think it's a simple disagreement on how important it may be. So a simple trick I learned from a successful business leader was asking 3 simple questions designed to focus on what's important. And I'm going to adapt it for this conversation and make it just 2 questions because of time. And so these are the 2 questions I would like each of you to answer as we wrap up this conversation. What should the ANC stop doing now? 111 years after it was established, 28 years after it took over the helm of affairs of South Africa, what should it stop doing to see itself progress to the future and become the party that really does manifest the hopes and dreams of South Africans? And what should the ANC do to keep itself going beyond 111 years? Omry, let me start with you.
Yes, on my side, we're campaigning to change the parliamentary electoral laws. We believe that once we elect, majority of members of parliament are elected directly by the citizens. We believe that the citizens will clean parliament much more than political parties. And inside the ANC, we are reforming how we elect leaders inside the ANC to change this method that we have been using in the past, what we call branch delegate conference format, where 1%, where 2% of ANC members elect leaders for 98% of members who are left at home. And that's why this system is bribed, and that's why vote rigging is high. It's because of that system. We believe that once we change these 2 laws, electoral laws, the ANC will be revived. The ANC will be rescued and renewed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mandla, if you can get to my questions, what should the ANC stop doing and what should it start doing to continue to guarantee itself into the future, really?
I believe that the ANC should do away with political representation and rather encourage various platforms to instill a sense of political participation and have people, especially the young people up and coming in various walks of life and various industries, a platform and opportunity to voice their opinions and voice their ideas and thinking going forward, which is one of the few key things which are very fundamental in shaping a better South Africa and a better ANC for the people of South Africa going forward.
All right, thank you. And finally, Lwazi, I'll give it to you to wrap things up. The ANC, what it's stopping and what it should start doing in order to continue into the future, and maybe not necessarily continue at the helm of affairs, but continue to see itself as a political party that holds sway in South Africa.
That President Thabo Mbeki once said is that rather better the few, but better than many, but poor. Meaning that rather you focus and not on having qualitative, morally upstanding and socially aware leaders than having a mass-based political party that takes in everyone, and you end up shielding those of you who are part of the worst of us, including those who are corrupt. And that will be the determining factor whether the ANC can transition from a normal liberation movement to a modern day political party that has the interest of the people at heart. And part and parcel of this renewal agenda that President Cyril Ramaphosa needs to undertake is ensuring that the ANC itself speaks to the lived realities and stops pandering to those it may think might become politically relevant in the future. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me. 111 years, it's not beans, as we might say in Nigeria. It's definitely something that the ANC should be proud of. But now, as Lwazi has said, the transformation from a liberation movement to a full-on political party that delivers on its promises and the hopes of the people is something that we all hope to see with Africa's longest surviving political party. Thank you for joining me on The Square.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
And at the end of the day, it is South Africans who will deliver judgment on the African National Congress. While it appears that judgment has started with some of the results from the recent polls, it may still take time for all of that to play out. And one thing we can all agree on is that historical achievements are not always a guide to future performance. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. I'll see you next time on Village Square, Africa.